The final months of World War II were a period of relentless advance across the collapsing German Reich. American and Allied commanders were accustomed to the brutal realities of combat, having witnessed unimaginable violence on battlefields from North Africa to the beaches of Normandy. They understood the cost of war, the necessary savagery, and the grim calculus of victory, but nothing in their military training or combat experience had prepared them for the true nature of the final secret the Nazis had kept hidden. As they pushed deeper into the German heartland in the spring of 1945, the advance began to slow, not by counterattack, but by a rising tide of bewildering, horrifying discovery. The reports filtering back to headquarters were confusing and deeply disturbing, speaking of places that seemed less like prisons and more like factories of death. These were the concentration camps, the industrial centers of the Holocaust, whose sheer scale of evil defied all prior human comprehension. Many commanders initially dismissed the early rumors as exaggerated propaganda, a common tool in the psychological warfare of any major conflict, finding the stories too monstrous to be literally true. Yet, as more and more units encountered these desolate, barbed wire compounds, the reports coalesced into a single, undeniable picture of systematic murder. The first sightings were often small, local camps, subcamps, labor sites, but the overwhelming evidence of mass starvation, torture, and wanton cruelty was consistent across every location. This emerging reality forced a profound and immediate shift in the focus of the American military leadership, moving beyond mere tactical objectives to a moral imperative of liberation and witness. The discovery began to reshape the very meaning of the war for the American forces, transforming it from a fight against military aggression into a desperate struggle against an unparalleled moral darkness. The Allied leadership quickly grasped that they were now confronting a crime so immense it transcended all conventional definitions of warfare, a deliberate policy to exterminate entire peoples. This dawning realization created a collective psychological shockwave that rippled through the ranks, from the newest private to the most battle-hardened general, irrevocably changing their perspective on the nature of human depravity. The specific moments of discovery at camps like Ohrdruf, Buchenwald, and Dachau were often chaos, a convergence of overwhelming horror and immediate military necessity. Commanders were not greeted by a conventional enemy or a strategic objective, but by silent, skeletal figures and mountains of grotesque evidence. General George S. Patton, renowned for his bluntness and iron will, arrived at Ohrdruf, a subcamp of Buchenwald, and was famously, uncharacteristically, speechless at the sight of the stacked, emaciated corpses. His diary entry recorded his profound physical and moral revulsion, a testament to the fact that even he, a man who had seen 4 years of war, was utterly broken by this scene. Other generals, like Brigadier General Hugh Gaffey, simply stood in stunned silence, their military bravado completely stripped away by the sheer magnitude of suffering they encountered. The immediate reaction was almost universally one of intense, paralyzing disbelief, followed by a burning, furious resolve to document and expose the truth to the world. The military minds trained for logical, strategic thinking found no logical explanation for the organized, bureaucratic machinery of death that stretched out before them. They had been taught to fight an army, but here they faced a government-sponsored program designed to extinguish the lives of millions, an evil that was administrative as much as it was violent. The sight of the crematoria, the piles of human hair, clothing, and even children's toys, presented an irrefutable argument that surpassed any atrocity report they had previously read. For many commanders, the personal weight of this discovery became a defining moment of their lives, overshadowing all their previous military victories and achievements. They recognized instantly that this was a historical moment that demanded not just liberation, but an unwavering commitment to memory and justice. The shock was often compounded by the realization that many of these atrocities were happening right next door to ordinary German towns, implicating the local civilian population in the knowledge of the camps. This forced American leaders to confront not just the SS guards, but the complicity of an entire nation in a crime of unprecedented scale, adding a new, complex layer to the occupation. Their first actions were pragmatic, securing the perimeters, providing emergency aid to the survivors, and immediately calling for high-level documentation teams to begin recording the evidence before it could be destroyed. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, personally visited Ohrdruf on April 12, 1945, only a few days after its liberation. His reaction was perhaps the most crucial for the historical record, setting the tone for the entire Allied approach to the Holocaust revelations. What he saw, the piles of corpses, the evidence of torture, shook him to his core, overriding his usual military reserve and strategic focus with a sense of moral outrage. Eisenhower's first command was not about battle lines or supply routes, but a categorical order for every soldier and officer possible to visit the camp and witness the horror firsthand. He was acutely aware that in the future, people might dismiss these revelations as mere wartime propaganda, fabricating or minimizing the extent of the atrocities. His immediate and visceral response was driven by the historical necessity of securing undeniable, physical proof of the Nazis' systematic barbarity. "I have visited the concentration camp at Ohrdruf," he wrote in a message, "and I have never been able to forget the sight. I was instantly convinced that I ought to send to my government and to the British government every evidence of the facts." He ordered the official Signal Corps and other photographic units to document everything with painstaking detail, ensuring no angle, no corpse, no detail of the infrastructure of death was left unrecorded. Eisenhower made a point of inviting not just the press, but also members of the US Congress and the British Parliament, insisting they come to Germany immediately to act as unimpeachable witnesses. His decision to force the issue, to drag the world's attention to the evidence, was an extraordinary moment of moral leadership that recognized the political nature of historical memory. He understood that a full accounting was not just a military operation, but a human necessity, a guarantee against future denial of the Nazis' unspeakable crimes against humanity. The sight of the starved and tormented survivors, coupled with the methodical killing apparatus, transformed his understanding of the conflict from a geopolitical struggle to a moral crusade against ultimate evil. Eisenhower's determination ensured that the record of the Holocaust would be preserved with the highest institutional authority, preventing any credible claim that the horrors were fabricated. His words became a solemn vow: "We are told that the American soldier does not know what he is fighting for. Now, at least, he knows what he is fighting against." The imperative for documentation became a defining characteristic of the American military response to the camp discoveries. It was a direct and unprecedented command: the war had to be put on hold, in effect, for the meticulous collection of evidence of the crime of the century. Commanders immediately understood that their victory over the German army would be incomplete if the world failed to grasp the full, hideous scope of the moral battle that had been won. Photographers and cinematographers of the U.S. Army Signal Corps were immediately dispatched to every liberated camp, ordered to use vast quantities of film to record everything. Their instructions were to capture the physical state of the survivors, the layout of the camps, the functioning of the crematoria, and the immense piles of personal belongings. These soldiers, many of whom had been documenting combat only weeks before, now found themselves chronicling a different kind of war crime, one that was static but profoundly disturbing. Every document found, every ledger detailing transport and extermination, was immediately secured and preserved for the eventual war crimes trials that the commanders knew must follow. The officers in charge treated the camps as crime scenes of the highest magnitude, ensuring the integrity of the evidence against the inevitable attempts at erasure or historical revisionism. They photographed the faces of the German townspeople forced to tour the camps, capturing their feigned ignorance, their shame, and their undeniable complicity for the historical record. The technical nature of the documentation, the use of objective camera angles and detailed written reports, was deliberate, designed to create a body of evidence that was legally and morally unassailable. This process of systematic documentation was a profound act of respect for the victims, a commitment to ensuring that their fate would not be lost to the abstract statistics of war. General Omar Bradley, among others, recognized the power of visual testimony to educate a world that had been shielded from the truth by the fog of war and Nazi secrecy. The sheer volume of film and reports generated by the U.S. Army in a matter of weeks stands as a monumental achievement in historical preservation and a testament to the commander's moral focus. It was a quiet, necessary battle against forgetting, waged with cameras and typewriters, a battle that would ultimately secure the legacy of the Holocaust for future generations. General George S. Patton, Jr., known for his aggressive pursuit of the enemy and his personal flamboyant style, adopted a unique and powerful strategy upon discovering the camps in his sector. Patton arrived at Ohrdruf with a skeptical, hard-bitten military mindset, but the sheer horror he witnessed transformed his strategy into one focused on moral shock. He immediately understood that the local German population could not be allowed to claim ignorance of the immense suffering that had taken place right on their doorsteps. His immediate, forceful order was to compel hundreds of German civilians from the surrounding towns to march to the liberated camps and personally confront the atrocity. This was a deeply dramatic and psychologically punishing move, a form of immediate, public reckoning designed to shatter the illusion of innocence and willful blindness. Patton's explicit goal was to force the citizens to witness the unspeakable results of the regime they had supported, making them bear a measure of moral responsibility for the crime. He ordered the civilians to walk past the open trenches filled with decomposing bodies, to look into the ovens, and to see the surviving prisoners struggling for life. His command to his own troops was equally explicit: escort them to the camp and make them look at everything, sparing no one from the appalling spectacle. Patton's decisive action was a direct challenge to the anticipated German narrative of denial, creating instant, public witnesses from the very people who might later try to disclaim knowledge. He invited leading American, British, and French journalists to the camps, ensuring that their reports would carry the weight of on-site observation, free from any taint of propaganda. The general's willingness to use the horror of the camps as a pedagogical tool demonstrated a clear understanding that the end of the war was also the beginning of a massive re-education process. He was ensuring that the facts of the Holocaust would be engraved into the public consciousness of both the victorious Allies and the defeated German population. Patton's method was brutal, confrontational, and utterly effective, creating a body of public testimony that backed up the military's photographic evidence with human, civilian witness accounts. His action solidified the grim, undeniable truth of the camps not merely as a military intelligence finding, but as a moral catastrophe demanding international recognition and justice. The reports filed by the American commanders did more than just relay military intelligence. They became foundational documents for the prosecution of war crimes and the creation of a new international moral order. The commanders' words were often simple, Unadorned, and yet profoundly impactful, their clipped, military language only amplifying the monstrous nature of the facts they reported. They spoke not in abstract terms of political ideology, but in concrete measurements of death, the number of bodies found, the dimensions of the gas chambers, the tonnage of ashes recovered. This precision was a deliberate counter to the vastness of the crime, providing tangible, verifiable data that could be used in a court of law against the perpetrators. The high-ranking generals, many of whom would later become revered figures in American history, placed their reputations on the line to vouch for the absolute truth of these horrific discoveries. Their unified and immediate response lent a powerful, institutional credibility to the accounts that no single journalist or soldier could have achieved alone. They understood that the historical significance of the camps required them to act as sober, credible historians as much as victorious generals. The command staff ensured that captured German officers were also forced to tour the sites, making their forced presence another layer of undeniable military testimony against the regime's claims of secrecy. The sheer organizational capacity of the American military was instantly brought to bear on the task of relief, investigation, and preservation, a massive shift in resources and priorities. Every military communication related to the camps carried an implicit moral weight, an acknowledgement that they were documenting the most consequential ethical failure in human history. The commanders ensured that the story of the camps would not be treated as a sidebar to the military victory, but as the central moral justification for the entire Allied cause. They instinctively understood that their duty was not just to defeat an enemy, but to secure the moral memory of millions who had been silenced by the machinery of the Nazi state. Their commitment to this task established a precedent for international accountability, laying the groundwork for the Nuremberg trials and the modern concept of crimes against humanity. The liberation of Buchenwald, one of the largest and most notorious of the concentration camps, fell to the American 6th Armored Division in mid-April 1945. The American commanders found a camp that was still somewhat organized, though the SS had fled, leaving behind nearly 21,000 prisoners, many on the brink of death. The physical state of the survivors, the walking skeletons, was a testament to years of systematic starvation and forced labor that shocked even the most hardened combat veterans. General Walton Harris Walker, upon receiving the first reports, was driven by a grim determination to reveal the camp's truth with official military authority. The soldiers immediately encountered the infamous Death's Head SS emblem and the cynical motto at the gate, Jedem das Sein, to each his own, a final, chilling piece of Nazi mockery. It was at Buchenwald that the American military staff had to confront the most tangible evidence of the Nazis' industrial scale of murder, including the crematorium and the experimentation blocks. Reports from the American officers focused heavily on the lack of humanity, the sheer coldness of the architecture and the administration designed to strip away all human dignity. They found evidence of a sophisticated underground resistance movement among the prisoners, who had managed to preserve evidence and even seize control of the camp in the moments before the American arrival. The commanders worked closely with these prisoner leaders, recognizing the invaluable nature of their testimony and their deep knowledge of the camp's internal workings and perpetrators. The sheer stench of the camp, a pervasive odor of death, disease, and burning flesh, was a detail that many commanders noted in their official correspondence, a sensory marker of the horror. One commander noted the surreal contrast between the beautiful German forests surrounding the camp and the moral desolation within its walls, emphasizing the deliberate concealment. The high-level visits that followed Buchenwald's liberation were essential in cementing the narrative of utter, unforgivable evil in the minds of the Allied policymakers. The sight of the camp was a powerful, galvanizing force that eliminated any residual doubt among the military and political leadership about the necessity of total and unconditional German defeat. The officers who were there ensured that Buchenwald's grim reality was immediately broadcast around the world, making the name synonymous with the ultimate depths of human cruelty. The camp at Dachau, liberated by American forces near Munich at the end of April 1945, carried a symbolic weight unlike any other, having been the Nazis' first concentration camp established in 1933. The American entry into Dachau was marked by a brief, bloody fight and the shocking discovery of the death train, a line of 40 boxcars filled with hundreds of emaciated corpses. The initial reports back to commanding officers detailed a scene of complete, unmanaged horror, prompting an immediate military response that was both humanitarian and retributive. American commanders found themselves instantly overwhelmed by the moral and logistical challenges of processing such a monumental sight of human suffering and massacre. The site of the gas chamber, though often described as only partially operational or used for experimentation, was a chilling, stark symbol of the intent for mass extermination. Their words often spoke of the profound silence of the camp's permanent structures, a terrible quietness that spoke volumes about the years of systematic oppression and violence that had taken place. The liberation triggered an immediate, intense psychological reaction among the soldiers, leading to instances of summary execution of captured SS guards, a testament to the overwhelming emotional trauma of the discovery. Commanders had to quickly re-establish discipline while simultaneously dealing with an ethical crisis that tested the very limits of their professional training and personal morality. General Linden, among the first senior officers to arrive, reported the sight with a stark, unvarnished honesty that emphasized the institutionalized nature of the camp's wickedness. His reports underscored the chilling precision with which the Nazis had perfected their methods of dehumanization and control over more than a decade. The scale of the human suffering at Dachau, condensed into the small, permanent compound, made an immediate, unforgettable impression on all who witnessed it. The camp became a powerful focal point for post-war trials, as its history of long-term existence offered a complete, damning narrative of the Nazi regime's trajectory from political terror to genocidal intent. The American commanders' meticulous efforts to secure and preserve the Dachau evidence were crucial in ensuring its place as a primary site of historical memory and a beacon for human rights. Perhaps the most impactful evidence for the American commanders came not from the physical structures, but from the voices of the liberated survivors. The prisoners, though severely weakened and traumatized, were eager to tell their stories, to ensure that the world understood the full truth of their ordeal and the names of their tormentors. Commanders like General Bradley and General Patton made it a point to speak directly with the surviving prisoners, using their testimony as an essential component of the official record. The personal accounts of systematic torture, daily humiliations, and the slow, calculated process of starvation provided a human dimension to the overwhelming statistics of death. These stories shattered any possible remaining belief that the camps were merely harsh labor facilities, proving them to be engines of deliberate, premeditated murder. The survivors' determination to cling to life, their resilience in the face of absolute evil, offered a profound counterpoint to the scenes of death that surrounded the American troops. Commanding officers facilitated the immediate recording of these testimonies by military intelligence units, recognizing the urgency of capturing the memories before they were lost. The translation teams worked around the clock, grappling with the multitude of languages and the sheer horror of the narratives they were tasked with transcribing. The commanders found themselves facing an ethical responsibility far beyond their military oath, a moral contract to become the guardians of these fragmented, sacred memories. The survivors' deep gratitude for liberation was often mixed with an intense, haunting grief for those who did not make it, a burden the American soldiers shared in the moment of discovery. This living, breathing testimony gave faces and names to the statistics of the Holocaust, irrevocably humanizing the great tragedy for the American forces. The commanders realized that the true power of their victory was not in the defeat of an army, but in the restoration of humanity to the surviving victims of a demonic system. Their commitment to amplifying the survivors' voices became a crucial first step in a long, arduous process of healing and historical redress for the Jewish people and all persecuted groups. General Maxwell D. Taylor, a highly respected officer, was among those who viewed the horrors of the concentration camps and internalized the lesson they held for the post-war world. His observations and subsequent communications reflect a commander grappling not just with the tactical realities of the war's end, but with its profound philosophical implications. Taylor and his peers recognized that the physical destruction of the camps did not erase the ideology that had created them, necessitating a grave warning to their troops and the wider world. He emphasized in his reports the absolute necessity of preventing future generations from minimizing or forgetting the calculated evil they had uncovered. The commander's warnings were often directed at the American soldiers themselves, cautioning them against becoming hardened or indifferent to the scale of the moral crime. They understood that the soldiers who witnessed the camps carried a unique and terrible responsibility to be the living proof against historical revisionism. Taylor's perspective underscored the idea that the fight was not just against the German army, but against a fundamental, systemic failure of humanity that could be replicated anywhere. His concern was for the moral and political future, ensuring that the revelation of the Holocaust was not treated as a momentary shock but as a permanent caution. The general's directives were designed to transform their combat-weary troops into witnesses and educators, ensuring the truth traveled home with them. They compelled soldiers to write letters to their families, detailing what they had seen, thereby expanding the circle of informed, reliable testimony beyond the official military channels. This grave commitment to memory was an implicit promise to the dead and the surviving that their suffering would serve a higher, enduring purpose of warning. The commanders acted as moral conduits, channeling the raw, devastating truth of the Holocaust from the killing fields of Europe to the conscience of the American people. Their official records reflect a shift from military planning to profound ethical contemplation, a rare moment in wartime command where moral truth superseded immediate strategy. Taylor's warnings served as a foundational principle for the post-war security structure, emphasizing that crimes against humanity were a threat to all nations, not just the victims. The psychological impact of the camp discoveries on American commanders and soldiers was immense, creating a profound, lifelong burden of knowing. They had faced death in battle, but they had never faced an evil so pure, so meticulously organized, and so devoid of any recognizable human motive beyond hatred. Many commanders were visibly aged and emotionally exhausted by the experience, their military professionalism barely concealing a deep, personal trauma. The realization that they had been fighting a war not just to save democracy, but to stop a genocide, fundamentally altered their self-perception and the meaning of their service. The general's correspondence often contained private reflections on the nature of evil, grappling with the limits of their religious or moral understanding in the face of such profound depravity. They found themselves having to comfort and manage the overwhelming grief and rage of their troops, who struggled to process the horrific sights they were forced to witness. The burden was magnified by the commander's duty to remain stoic and functional, while internally reeling from the stench, the images, and the stories of endless suffering. They were tasked with the impossible, to integrate the systematic, industrial scale of the Holocaust into the traditional narrative of military conflict and victory. The sheer volume of human waste, the piles of shoes, glasses, and gold teeth, was a horrifying testament to the sheer number of victims, a figure too vast for a single mind to contain. For many, the sight of the ovens and the medical experimentation rooms became a permanent psychological scar, a truth they could never fully share with those who had not been there. The commander's resolve to document and testify was in part an attempt to offload this immense moral weight, to turn personal trauma into public, undeniable evidence. Their sense of duty extended into the post-war era, as many dedicated their later careers to ensuring the Holocaust was taught, remembered, and never allowed to be minimized. The knowledge gained in the spring of 1945 was a terrible, necessary inheritance, one that fundamentally shaped the conscience of a generation of American military leaders. The legacy of the American commanders who witnessed the concentration camps is enshrined in their unwavering commitment to historical truth and the principle of never again. Their reports and their actions immediately following the liberation provided the essential foundation for the global consensus on the Holocaust's reality and its unique moral stature. The insistence by Eisenhower and others on immediate, irrefutable documentation ensured that Holocaust denial, while it exists, can never gain credible institutional footing. Their legacy is a standing military and moral order that demands the intervention of civilized forces whenever genocide threatens to engulf a population, regardless of political complexity. The commander's testimony formed a crucial backbone for the prosecution's case at the Nuremberg trials, where their documented evidence brought Nazi perpetrators to international justice. They were instrumental in demonstrating that military service could not be divorced from a higher moral duty to humanity and the rule of law. The sight of the camps indelibly marked the foreign policy and military doctrine of the United States, creating a post-war commitment to human rights and intervention against mass atrocities. The commander's words, often delivered with a raw, authoritative shock, became part of the permanent lexicon of human rights advocacy and historical education. Their personal moral transformation at the gates of the camps is a profound lesson in leadership, proving that true command requires both strategic skill and deep moral courage. The generations of soldiers who followed them inherited this moral mandate, a solemn understanding that the defense of freedom includes the defense of human dignity itself. The preserved camps, which the commanders worked tirelessly to secure, stand today as memorials and educational sites, direct results of their immediate and decisive actions in 1945. The American commanders of World War II left behind a legacy that transcends mere military victory, offering a universal, perpetual warning against the dangers of hatred, indifference, and organized cruelty. Their legacy is a call to continuous vigilance, ensuring that the dark secret they uncovered is never forgotten and the moral high ground is never surrendered to the forces of darkness.